Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you guys a spoiler-free review of Batman The Long Halloween Part 1 and Part 2 and letting you guys know if you should watch it. Before we get into the spoiler-free review, if you guys are new in here and you haven't already hit that subscribe button, make sure to do so and turn notifications so you don't miss any time I upload a new video or go live. But without wasting more time, let's get right into it. Starting off with Part 1, this one honestly bored me a lot. And this one, by the time I finished it, I was like, I don't even know if I want to watch the second one. I just felt like it wasn't really entertaining to me. I'm glad I watched the second one because I have a completely different opinion on the second one, but this first one honestly did just bore me. My favorite part was definitely the ending of the movie. It had a decent twist and it had some great action. The final battle of the first movie, though it was slightly underwhelming because it didn't necessarily like finish off a full story, it did feel like it was still fun. It was cool action. It was a cool story that they were playing out in the final battle. But other than that, there's nothing really much that I thought was crazy about this movie. I thought Catwoman was pretty cool. I thought Harvey Dent's small introduction was pretty cool. I like that we learned about his girlfriend / wife, and I feel like we learned enough about Harvey Dent's character in the first one to where in the second one we didn't necessarily need an introduction. And I think that's why the two-part movie works, because in the first movie you get a great introduction to Harvey Dent, and then the second one is where he actually comes into play. He turns into Two-Face, all that kind of stuff. So it feels like you don't have to waste time in the second movie prepping Harvey Dent's character, because in the first one we already had just enough time with him to actually understand his character. I also feel like Joker felt pretty useless in this movie. He really had no depth. I really had no care for his character. He didn't have any crazy ties to any gangs or mobs that made me care for him. This movie, he doesn't really do anything. I feel like he's just there. I feel like we have no real purpose for him other than for him to just be a plot point. So I don't really understand his entire like area of motive, I guess you could say, in the movie. I mean, obviously he just wants to like spray people in the town. Like, that's not a spoiler, it's in the trailer, but I just definitely feel like there's not really a purpose for him in the movie. And that's not in a bad way, because I love the Joker. Anytime the Joker's in anything, I'll watch it no matter what. But I just feel like he was more of a plot point in this movie, and I feel like he wasn't really necessary. I also wish the holiday story was explored a little more. Like I mentioned before, Harvey Dent's character was explored just enough to where we had enough story on him in the first movie, so where they don't have to waste time in the second one explaining more stuff. We already had a base for his character. The holiday story, I felt like it was super rushed into the final movie. It feels like it was like a looming threat in the first one, but it really wasn't anything crazy. And even the second one, to an extent, didn't really mention the holiday character too much until the very end, which I'll go into later when I talk about the second movie. But I also thought the action was fairly entertaining throughout most of Part 1. It just didn't do much overall for me. But what I mean by that is like the impact of the action wasn't really there. The action was there. It was great. It was like great fight scenes, great choreography. But overall, I just felt like the action was there to be there. It was entertaining. It was fun in the moment. But when it came to story beats and moving a story forward in general, I feel like it didn't do much. But moving on to talk about The Long Halloween Part 2, this one was much better than the first one in my opinion. It was also way more brutal overall. I had such a fun time with this one. I definitely was surprised by the gore, and this one is actually rated R. Part 2 is rated R. Part 1 is only rated PG-13, so you'll probably be able to tell massive differences, especially when it comes to the level of blood and gore in the second one. Also, it doesn't feel like it's crazy over the top. It feels like it's super necessary. My favorite action sequence in this movie, other than the final battle, is definitely the first action sequence. It's between Catwoman and Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy had little time on screen, but the time she was on screen, it was absolutely awesome. That fight scene was, again, one of my favorites. It's probably like my second favorite in the series overall. And the final battle is probably my first favorite. But moving on, I want to talk about Harvey Dent. Now, Two-Face / Harvey Dent is the main villain overall. Joker is in the second movie, but he's like, I still don't understand like how he's in the movie. I don't want to get into specifics because then I'm spoiling, but yeah, I don't understand how Joker's in the second movie, but Harvey Dent does end up being the main villain, and that's in the trailers. He's literally on the second movie's poster, so that's not spoiling anything. But my favorite thing about Harvey Dent's character is how much my opinion on him changed from the first movie to the second movie. Obviously, in the first movie, he wasn't even in it a crazy amount. He was just trying to kind of introduce as a base character, and I was like, okay, I feel really no sympathy for him. But in the second one, they did him really well. He has to balance the law and like real justice, and I think that's what kind of creates the Two-Face character, because in this movie it's more of a dual personality type of thing, whereas in The Dark Knight, for example, it's just Harvey Dent turning evil completely. This movie, he's kind of taken over by this other personality, which is Two-Face. So I thought that was cool how he tries to balance it in the beginning as Harvey Dent himself, but then once he turns into Two-Face, the other thing he's balancing are the two personalities, which just make everything even more brutal. I also thought Two-Face had pretty dope action sequences, especially the fact that he has like no powers, he's just a dude fighting. There's also a crazy twist halfway through the movie, which is not the transformation. There's a transformation that's led off of this other crazy twist that I really love. I wasn't really expecting it and it came out of nowhere, but I did like the twist. It really changes up the character completely. And then also, speaking of the transformation itself, I thought it was almost perfect. I couldn't even think of a better way to execute it, so I think it is perfect. I really love the way they transformed his character from Harvey to like Harvey battling with the other personality and then to completely turning into Two-Face. I really like that whole transition. And then also I just love the way he gets taken over completely and like every aspect of his life changes so quickly because he turns into Two-Face fairly late in the movie, so I feel like we don't get enough time to actually see everything in depth, but I feel like we get enough coverage of everything to where it doesn't feel like we're leaving anything out. But now I want to move on to talk about Scarecrow. I thought Scarecrow, he didn't always feel necessary, but he was always essential to the story, and so he always has this like underlying connection to the story, which I really like. And that's like the main thing with all of these villains, because there's just so many. They're all in the movie at some point, and then they all have some underlying connection, and then they show up at the end. So I think that was really well done, and it's a great way to actually be able to balance this many villains at once. I also really like the way they use these villains. Every villain has a different connection to Bruce Wayne, and that's why I think they all work together. Also, this doesn't feel like a Batman movie, I'm gonna be honest, but it doesn't feel like a Batman movie in the best way, if that makes sense. It feels like Batman is just the catalyst for all of this to go down. It doesn't feel like it's like they're telling a story from Batman's perspective. It feels like they're just telling the story of Gotham, and Batman is the one initiating all these stories. These movies are surrounding the personalities and ideas of just these main heroes, but this movie, or at least these two movies, felt like they were kind of telling the story of the entire city because there were so many villains. I think that might be the main reason, but overall it just didn't feel like it was specifically a Batman story. It felt like it was a story of Gotham. So the last thing I want to talk about is the final battle. I thought this final battle just had so many more stakes than the part 1 final battle. I thought the part 1 final battle was just weirdly like created. Like it just like there was a weird transition between like the regular part of the movie and then the final battle itself. This one, everything felt so natural. I actually cared for almost every single character in the final battle because we had some prior connection to all of them. So overall, I thought this final battle was just better executed than part 1's. And also the balance between all of the villains was great. I really loved the way they balanced time between each villain. We also get like a rematch between Catwoman and Poison Ivy. We get so many smaller moments between these heroes and villains, or two heroes and then all the villains. I think it's really well executed, and it's hard to pull off 1 to 2 heroes versus like an entire gallery of them, and this movie pulled it off. So overall, do I think Batman Long Halloween Part 1 and Part 2 is worth it? Yes. I think Part 1 is very slow, but Part 2 really ramps it up and makes all of it worth it. Again, don't expect a full story from just Part 1 alone. You do have to watch Part 2. Part 2 is by far the best one. I don't think there should be any competition, but Part 1 isn't even that bad. I just felt like it was slightly boring in my opinion, but other people that I've seen that have watched the movie really liked it, so I definitely recommend checking out both. But yeah guys, that's it for this video. If you guys are new in here and you did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn notifications on so you don't miss any time I upload a video or I go live. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.